Checking. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, good afternoon, and welcome to this year's African Development Bank Evaluation Week. It is an honor to be the MC for this event as we gather to explore the theme, Navigating Rough Seas Towards Brighter Horizon for Africa. Today, we embark on an important journey that seeks to address the pressing challenges facing our continent. From economic instability to climate change, social inequalities, all while focusing on inclusive and sustainable growth. So welcome to the biannual event of the African Development Bank Group, hosted by Independent Development Evaluation, IDEV, in collaboration with the various departments across the bank. For those of you who are new to IDEV, IDEV is the Independent Development Evaluation function of the African Development Bank. It conducts independent evaluations of bank operations, policies, and strategies across various project sectors and regions. Its findings help the bank and various stakeholders learn from experience and enhance development outcomes. My name is Jen Sumba, Division Manager at IDEV. I lead a team focusing on knowledge management, outreach, and evaluation capacity development. And I'll be your master of ceremony. So we approach this event with great humility, recognizing evaluation is one of the vital tools or instruments for measuring development effectiveness. So over the next 3 days, this flagship event will provide a platform to advocate for and foster dialogue on the critical role of evaluative knowledge in Africa. Our focus will be to enhance needed to monitor progress, enhance accountability, promote learning, guide resource allocation, strengthen partnerships, and engage stakeholders effectively. This morning, we kicked off with 2 pre-conference capacity development workshops, one on impact evaluations, and the other one on cutting-edge approaches for communicating evaluative insights. So this opening session sets the tone for the days ahead by emphasizing the pivotal role of evaluative knowledge in shaping Africa's development path. The value of systematic evaluation and data-driven insights cannot be overrated, as they help unlock the continent's potential while ensuring no one is left behind. We'll also reflect on the African Development Bank's rich legacy over the past 60 years, so its commitment to leveraging evaluation as a tool for progress, responsiveness, and credibility. So here's a fun fact for you. Did you know? Over 60 years, the African Development Bank has financed more than 5,000 projects. I'm sure among you know this. Helping to build key infrastructure that now connects over 350 million people in the continent. So from renewable energy to transportation, these projects have transformed Africa's economic landscape, as it was well captured in the AfDB annual report of 2023. So today's program features insights from leaders and experts, beginning with welcoming remarks from the AfDB Evaluator General, followed by opening remarks by the Vice President for the Regional Development, Integration, and Business Delivery Complex, We will then have a keynote address on the importance of overcoming Africa's current challenges. We will also participate in a panel discussion exploring how evaluative knowledge enhances effectiveness and impact of development institutions. So as we engage in these discussions, I encourage you to consider how evaluative knowledge can continue to drive Africa's progress, how we can harness the power of evaluation to do three things. Only three things today. So the first is to inform strategic decisions. Second, to refine our approaches. And third, to ensure resilience in times of instability. So before we begin the program, a quick reminder that this is a hybrid event with participants joining us both in person and online. Let me share with you a few housekeeping rules. So first, please make sure your mics are muted or off for those in the room. We have interpretation in English and French. For those online, please select the language of your preference by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen. For those in the room, please use the headset and select a channel that fits your language preference. Third, during the Q&A, you can raise your hand and the moderator will select the participant accordingly. You can also type question or comment in the Q&A and chat box for those online. And finally, we are recording today's event. So therefore, you'll be receiving a link to the recording via email in a few days. We have an interesting program ahead, and we hope to end before 4:45 p.m. GMT. So to start, I invite Karen Roth Musterman to make the welcoming remarks. She's the Evaluator General of the African Development Bank since April 2022. She joined IDEV in 2014 as a Division Manager for Knowledge Management, Outreach, and Capacity Development. Before IDEV, she worked with AfDB's Resource Mobilization Department. And prior to joining the bank in 2009, she was a Senior Policy Advisor at the Dutch Ministry of Finance. Karen holds master's degrees in political science, European studies, and economics. So welcome, Karen.
Thank you, Jane. Mrs. Niale Kaba, Minister of Economy, Planning and Development of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire and Chairperson of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group, represented by Mr. Marcelin Cissé, Director General of Planning, Ministry of Economy, Planning and Development of the Republic of Côte d'Ivoire, Mrs. Marie-Laure Akin-Ologbade, Vice President for Regional Development, Integration and Business Delivery of the African Development Bank Group, Ms. Mayowa Kuyoro, Partner and Head of Africa Financial Services Group of McKinsey & Co. Africa, members of the Boards of Directors and Senior Management of the African Development Bank Group, distinguished speakers, presenters, and panelists, esteemed partners and participants, dear colleagues and friends, good afternoon. It is both an honor and a pleasure to welcome you, whether you are joining us in person or virtually, to the opening of the 6th AfDB Development Evaluation Week. On behalf of Independent Development Evaluation at the African Development Bank, I extend a warm welcome to you all. Our theme this year, Navigating Rough Seas Toward a Brighter Horizon for Africa, speaks to the multifaceted challenges that Africa continues to face, ranging from economic turbulence, environmental and social and climate change, and insecurity, to social inequalities, unemployment, and health issues, among others. Yet, despite these hurdles, Africa's journey toward development and prosperity remains unstoppable. The event theme reflects both the complexity of the challenges and the tremendous opportunities that lie ahead for the continent. As we chart this course, one vital question resonates. What role does evaluation play in helping to unlock Africa's potential? How can we harness the power of evaluation to drive progress across economic, social, political, and environmental spheres? We are all aware of the importance of evaluative knowledge in shaping successful strategies, policies, operations, and processes, not just for Africa, but on a global scale, and of the role of evaluation in holding institutions to account for results. Over the past 44 years, the African Development Bank has relied on evaluations to examine what has worked well and what has not, and to guide its initiatives, ensuring that they are efficient, effective, and adaptive to ever-changing development landscape. It has also used evaluations to assess and report on its performance, thereby contributing to transparency and accountability to shareholders, financiers, and beneficiaries. And it has been recognized internationally for this transparency. Recognizing, assessing, and learning from both achievements and shortcomings is fundamental to driving the bank's transformative agenda. By continuously reviewing, drawing, and integrating the lessons from past experience, it not only sharpens its ability to respond to new challenges, but also reinforces its commitment to effective sustainable development. Evaluative knowledge was instrumental in shaping the bank's new 10-year strategy for 2024-2033, which prioritizes accelerating inclusive green growth and fostering prosperous, resilient economies. This knowledge will also support the implementation of concrete actions to confront Africa's pressing challenges, providing the evidence base necessary to track progress, enhance accountability, inform resource allocation, and facilitate stakeholder engagement. At this juncture, I would like to congratulate the bank's member countries, its boards of directors, management, and staff for the development of this forward-looking strategy. Its success will depend on our collective efforts to continue to learn from the past, to regularly assess our progress, and to adapt for the future. IDEV stands ready to support the bank in implementing its new 10-year strategy, with knowledge from existing evaluations and with new work. We are currently mapping the evaluative knowledge we already have in the priority areas of the 10-year strategy, and we are developing our new work program for 2025 to 2027 in alignment with the chapters of the new strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, this year marks a significant milestone, the 60th anniversary of the African Development Bank. Over the past 6 decades, the bank has established itself as a cornerstone of Africa's development, contributing to the continent's sustainable economic growth and social progress. The 60-year celebrations at the 2024 annual meetings and last week were a moment of reflection, an opportunity to assess how far we've come and to recommit to tackling Africa's complex challenges with renewed energy. This year's AfDB Development Evaluation Week is not merely a platform for sharing insights, experiences, and best practices. It is an opportunity to advocate for the critical role of evaluation in shaping Africa's development path. We will explore ways to strengthen the capture and use of evaluative knowledge within the AfDB and its member countries, while fostering collaboration with the global development community. Our goal is clear: to enhance development effectiveness across Africa. Over the next 3 days, we will engage in strategic discussions around 3 pivotal issues that are essential to Africa's transformation: fostering economic diversification, overcoming environmental and climate challenges, and addressing fragility and social risks. These discussions are aligned with the core priorities of the bank's new 10-year strategy and are designed to be actionable. You will hear about evaluation work undertaken by IDEV and others in these areas and how it can be impactful in guiding future interventions. In keeping with our commitment to strengthening evaluation capacity and promoting an evaluation culture across Africa, we began today with 2 pre-conference workshops focused on impact assessment and on communicating evaluative insights. I extend my sincere thanks to all who participated. Continuous learning and skill building are crucial if we are to meet our continent's ambitions. We look forward to the insights from our speakers, presenters, panelists, and you, our audience members. You all have your own knowledge, expertise, views, and experience, and I encourage you to share these. Sharing knowledge not only empowers us, but also brings us one step closer to a brighter, more prosperous future for Africa. Thank you once again for joining us. Allow me to hand back to the Master of Ceremony, Jane, to continue the program.
Thank you, Karen, for your welcoming remarks. So moving along the program, for the opening remarks, I invite Mrs. Marilon Akin Alukbade, the Vice President for Regional Development, Integration, and Business Delivery at the African Development Bank Group. She oversees the bank's strategic engagement with 54 regional member countries, managing an annual $10 billion lending program and a $60 billion portfolio, driving impactful results across the African continent. She manages one of the largest complexes in the bank, driving operational decentralization across 5 regional hubs, 32 country offices, and 7 liaison offices. With close to 30 years of experience, Mrs. Akin Olugbade has held senior roles including Director General of West Africa region, demonstrating leadership in capital markets, asset management, and regional development. She holds a master's degree in applied economics from Université Paris-Dauphine and a postgraduate diploma in management from Université Pantheon-Sorbonne. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jane. This is a rather long introduction that makes me blush. But thank you very much. And distinguished guest partners and colleagues, good afternoon. I will stand on existing protocol. It is truly my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2024 African Development Bank Group Development Evaluation Week on the theme Navigating Rough Seas Towards a Brighter Horizon for Africa. Your presence here today underscores our collective commitment to harnessing the power of evaluating knowledge in shaping Africa's future. You've heard it, Africa stands at a pivotal moment. Indeed, the continent urgently needs accelerated economic development. Our population growth rate, and now with the youngest population in the world, means that the GDP growth rates must be at double figures for a sustained period. And Africa still grapples with a complex array of challenges. And it has been said, from insecurity and political instability to economic headwinds, environmental degradation, climate change, and of course, gender inequality, to name just a few. However, we also see these challenges as presenting us with unique opportunities for growth and transformation. And this is what the African Development Bank new 10-year strategy for the period 2024-2023 embodies perfectly, as we plan to focus on seizing these opportunities to pursue a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and integrated continent. This strategy also reflects the bank's very clear and ambitious commitment to accelerating inclusive green growth and building resilient, prosperous economies across all our regional member countries. As many of you know, and Karen reminded us that just last week, we celebrated the African Development Bank's 60th anniversary. And for us, the celebration was really a momentous occasion where we were very pleased to honor both our current but even more importantly, our retired staff, because they have contributed to where the bank is. We have had an opportunity to reflect on the bank legacy and also to project ourselves and envision the future. It was also a time to celebrate our collective achievement and the significant stride that we have made in contributing to the advancement of Africa's development. And today, we continue our journey beyond this very beautiful milestone with the importance of this Development Evaluation Week. And we see of the importance of this week even more clearly. The event serves as a crucial platform to explore how evaluative knowledge can help to unlock Africa's economic, social, and environmental potential. You see, evaluations are at the heart of the bank's work. Economic, ensuring that we examine and we draw the lessons from previous experience to inform, of course, the design and the implementation of future policies, future strategies, future operations, so that we can truly rely on an evidence. So these are evidence-based activities that we will carry out. And we want to make sure that we target the right issues. And by providing a transparent view of the results and the performance, the evaluations truly enhance accountability, and they help us to understand, of course, what has worked well, what has not worked, for who and for whom and under which circumstances, and therefore really deepening development effectiveness and helping to promote an effective and efficient use of resources. And in this process, the Independent Development Evaluation Function, IDEV, and the Committee for Operation and Development Effectiveness of the Board of Directors, CODE, play a vital role. They ensure that our evaluation processes are rigorous, that they are credible, transparent, and well aligned with best practices. And they help all of us to foster a culture of learning within the bank, and also by working with management and the staff to promote the application of lessons and recommendations from evaluation. And this approach not only improves our practices and our outcomes, but it also embeds continuous improvement into the core of our development efforts. The bank's commitment to learning, to accountability, to transparency cannot be emphasized enough. As many of you know, for the second consecutive year, it has been recognized, the bank has been recognized as the most transparent among 50 global development institutions in the 2024 Aid Transparency Index, emerging with a top score. I believe it's a score that has never been reached in the history of the evaluation, an almost perfect score of 98.8 over 100. I think it deserves a round of applause. And this obviously sets an excellent precedent for high quality data and evidence publication. And this is also premised on the bank detailed publication of all the project related documents, among them, of course, evaluation report. And Karen, you will not be surprised if I say that sometimes we, on the ground, in the field, we feel that it's a lot of information that we are sharing, but we certainly comply and contribute gladly when such information is requested by the IDEV office. And I have really a full confidence that this very open governance practice will continue, as it is a key performance and delivery priority for our 10-year strategy. Now, as we embark on implementing the new 10-year strategy, the role of every stakeholder is absolutely vital. To achieve our goals, it will be essential that we foster very strong collaboration among the bank, among our regional member countries, and all our partners, including the private sector, the civil society, academia. And by working together, by sharing insights, by augmenting each other's strengths, we can effectively seize emerging opportunities in addressing Africa's multifaceted challenges. Regional member countries are key. They are crucial in driving this strategy forward, and their on-the-ground perspective, their active engagement will ensure that all our initiatives are truly tailored to local needs and priorities. And this is why it's so important to continue to engage with them, with the countries, to regularly visit them, as I like to do, and to continue to gain vital insight on how the bank's work is impacting people's daily lives. Ladies and gentlemen, dear partners, colleagues, the bank's Development Evaluation Week is a lighthouse that will help to steer us away from the rough seas, choppy water, turbulence, and certainly we will chart a way towards a prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and integrated Africa. And this week's discussion will facilitate reflection on the lessons from our past, and they will help us leverage these lessons to navigate the future. The topics that will be discussed address issues that are all pertinent today, such as, of course, the need for Africa to diversify economically and to strengthen its resilience to shock, but also the strategies that aim to reduce fragility, which unfortunately is on the rise on the continent. But we will also talk about partnerships in the area of environment and climate change and promoting transformational change, or intervention that improve the quality of life of women and youth will also feature prominently in our discussion. And I really wish you productive and insightful discussion. Thank you all again for your participation. And I would like to end by thanking IDEV with Karen as the head of this amazing team, producing year after year very important work. This is, I believe, for the past 8 years that IDEV has consistently organized the Development Evaluation Week every other year, with themes that are constantly speaking directly to the issues that the continent has had to grapple with, and of course, how evaluation contributes to that. And I'm really very optimistic that the outcomes of these events will help us to steer and promote quality development progress towards a brighter future for the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, VP Marilon. I didn't mean to make you blush during the introduction, but now you've also made me blush for being very candid in how our evaluative knowledge is being used on the ground in addressing the challenges that the continent faces. And actually, you brought it home in terms of emphasizing the importance of this week by reflecting on past lessons, focusing on economic diversification, resilience, and in the end, you talked about the strategic partnerships that we need, because the bank cannot do it alone. We need to bring the others on board. So thank you for that. So we move to the keynote address. I invite Ms. Mayowa Kuyoro. She leads Mackenzie FinTech and payment work across East Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, as well as the firm's financial services practice in Africa. She advises governments, social sector organizations, and the private sector on growth and large-scale transformations. Ms. Kuyoro also leads research on economic development and gender parity for Mackenzie's Global Institute. And she is the author of several reports on these topics, including the critically acclaimed Reimagining Economic Growth in Africa, Turning Diversity into Opportunity. She holds a first-class master's degree in engineering in mechanical and manufacturing from University of Warwick, and an MBA with distinction from Harvard Business School. So welcome to Ms. Mayowa Kuyoro. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Please permit me to stand on existing protocols. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for the opportunity to address this audience, which includes representatives and delegates from the private, public, and social sectors on the challenges and opportunities facing Africa based on recent McKinsey research that I think was just a reference, which was called Reimagining Economic Growth in Africa, Turning Diversity into Opportunity. Every 5 years or so, the partners of the Africa office invest some time to create a long-term perspective on how the continent is performing and what are sort of real actions that need to be taken. So I will just share with you some highlights from that report, which was released late last year. Please do confirm that you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So over the last 30 years, we've seen that Africa has only achieved a rise in middle decade. Between 1990 and 2000, our GDP growth was around 2.7%. Between 2000 and 2010, our growth almost doubled to 5.1%. And that was when you had things such as the Economist article saying Africa rising and so on and so forth. And then over the last 10 years, that growth has sort of shifted back again to, the low 3%. We stopped, I think maybe one thing to say is we stopped just after COVID, so just before COVID, because we wanted to understand long-term trends and not sort of have the noise from COVID. But even when we looked post-COVID, some of the trends that we will talk about in the report sort of stay valid. However, I've talked about Africa at an aggregate level. We all know that it's 54 different countries with different sort of trajectories and paths. What this chart essentially shows is the growth of African countries over 2 decades, right? So we look at the growth between 2000 and 2010, and then between 2010 and 2019. And what we have essentially is the top right-hand corner is a set of countries that have consistently grown above average. These countries, however, tend to be smaller economies, and they are clustered across West and East Africa. Similarly, on the top left-hand corner, these are countries that have grown significantly or sort of accelerated over the last 10 decades, and they've grown above our average growth. Now, the bottom half of the graph you can see has some big economies there, such as the South Africas, the Nigerias, Egypt, and Morocco's, and so. And you see that all of these countries have grown a little bit, some significantly below the line. Some have recently slowed down, right? When you look at the trajectory over 20 years, such as in Nigeria and Angola, and some of them have consistently grown sort of slower when you look at countries such as South Africa. Collectively, when you look at the top of the graph, those smaller economies sort of represent around 50% of the population of Africa. So it's not all doom and gloom. And there's some countries that have consistently, like I said, grown faster. Now, we said, let's understand what was, and so we did a piece of work to try and understand what was the driver of the significant slowdown, right? And so we extrapolated the 2019 GDP based off of historical growth rate. And if we had grown basically the same way as we had grown in our rising decade, we would have collectively driven around 3 trillion worth of output. However, the actual was 2.6. And we said, where is this drop coming from? And what you can see here is that collectively, Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa collectively account for 65% of the decline in growth on the continent. So the downward trends in the big three economies really had a significant and outsized effect on the overall continent GDP. I think another interesting thing for us as we did this piece of research was that when you look at a Nigeria, the bulk of that slowdown is not coming from extractive industries as you would expect, but actually services. So there's now again a question of how much are we monetizing our economies in those space. When you look at Egypt and South Africa, sort of there's a bit of a balance between the services and the extractive industries. When you then look at where people are employed and where output is coming from, you see that between 2000 and 2019, we're experiencing a structural shift in where people are employed. In 2000, around 58% of Africans were employed in agriculture and 30% were employed in services. However, by 2019, that 58% that was employed in agriculture had dropped down to 49%, and correspondingly, 39% of Africans are now employed in services. However, the types of services that these folks are employed in are what we typically see as sort of lower productivity types of industries. So things like retail trade, where the output is not necessarily as high. And so you can see on the output side or the GVA side, there hasn't been that much of a shift. The output is sort of relatively constant with agriculture and with services. When we look at productivity, which is a very important measure, we measure productivity as the output per worker, you can see that Africa, on the most part, is lagging the rest of emerging markets. From a whole economy perspective, when you look across services, industry, extraction, and agriculture, you can see that we're really to the left of the chart. When you look at services, when you look at agriculture, especially those two sectors, Africa is quite behind the rest of the world when it comes to the average output per worker. However, and I think this chart is one of the reasons I continue to be excited about the continent, although I always say it's sort of a double-edged sword. By 2050, Africa will add about 800 million people to the global workforce, and it's going to be home. The previous speaker had spoken about the fact it's going to be it's the youngest and largest population globally. This is also in the context in which China is declining, Europe is declining, North America and Latin America are remaining relatively flat. So the question then becomes, how do we ensure that this population actually becomes a boon to us and it's an advantage and not a disadvantage? I think numerous examples persist across the continent of what happens when our youth are not gainfully employed and have the right skills for the workforce of today. From a trade perspective, again, I'm sure this is not news to all of us. I think that the latest numbers we saw was that collectively, both import and export, our intra-African imports and export are less than 15% sort of collectively. I think the other thing that always shocks people when we show this chart is that actually when you look at from a trading bloc perspective, Europe continues to be the largest a trade partner, closely followed by China and the US to Africa. And when you look and sort of go underneath the hood of what is being traded, Africa tends to export raw materials and products with little value add and import more finished products from the rest of the world. Again, as we think about the future of the continent and think about issues we need to address, this is one of those things where, one, how do we increase the amount of trade, and their initiatives such as the AfCFTA, which is sort of set up to address it, but also how can we ensure that we are increasingly beneficiating and driving more value addition within the shores of the continent. From a city perspective, you will see, and I always say there's no right or wrong answer. I think this is just a fact of the matter. Our populations are heavily concentrated relative to other regions. So what we've done on the left-hand side is taken a few African cities, looked at the city population and indexed to the size of the largest population. And you see that with the exception of Accra or South Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana, and actually Cameroon, most countries have their second cities less than half the size of their primary cities or their biggest cities. Whereas if you go to the right-hand side of the chart, you can see that in countries such as Brazil, China, India, and even the US, you have quite a number of cities that are sort of similar in size, or you don't have that strong bifurcation across urban centers. What does this mean? I always say this is a very personal chart. It means that if I'm a young graduate of from any one of these countries, there are very few options in terms of where I can go to be gainfully employed. I think the other part that we need to think about on this is also our urban infrastructure. We talk about the infrastructure deficit on the continent, and people size it anywhere between $60 and $100 billion annually. Is our city infrastructure, whether it's hard infrastructure such as roads, water and sanitation, soft infrastructure such as digital, is it sufficient for the population that is coming ahead of us? So these are some of the key things that decision makers and policymakers have to think about as we address what the future of the continent looks like. From a consumption perspective, consumption continued to grow over the last decade, but that shape of consumption, or the shape of the consumption growth, was very different. Between 2000 and 2010, our golden or rising decade, a lot of the consumption growth came from the fact that people had more money to spend. So 64% of the growth came from actually having more money to spend, while only 36% came from population growth. Whereas if you look at the last 10 years, that has completely reversed, right? You now have 76% of the population growth just being, of the consumption growth just being driven by the fact that there is a rise in population, and only 24% being driven by people having more money to spend. And in fact, what we see, about this, I used to laugh during sort of just after COVID, when a lot of the rest of the world was talking about the fact that order sizes were becoming smaller. And I said, that's our everyday life on the continent. You can get cooking oil, you can get bleach, you can get shampoo in sachets. And I think that's a result of the fact that, yes, there's a population here, but the average spending power hasn't grown as fast. And so you have companies who are then sort of innovating on how to address the realities of living on the continent. And the shape of growth, by the way, has an impact on, such a big impact on how well we would do. So if we are growing over the next 10 years, again, just driven by population growth, we expect to see output a bit more moderated than if it's actually driven by income. And again, as operators on the continent, there's implications for how you would sort of adapt to the reality of what is driving growth. And again, linked to productivity. Productivity has such a big part to play in the shape of our consumption growth going forward. Finally, from a company's perspective, we did, and I have to put a caveat that this was done before the raft of devaluations that we had across the continent late last year. But we essentially have looked across the continent to find companies that are making over $1 billion today. And, Africa cumulatively has about 350 companies that are making over $1 billion, and that's in revenue, with a cumulative revenue of around 1.1 trillion. And these companies are scattered all over the continent, However, South Africa has a disproportionate share. So about 45% of these $1 billion companies are domiciled in South Africa. You have around 20 Morocco, 33 in Egypt, 23 in Nigeria, and then the rest is scattered across the continent. From a sector perspective, you can see that these companies are, again, quite highly dispersed across sectors. However, the top 4 sectors, oil and gas, metals and mining, retail and consumer goods, and financial services, collectively contribute around 60% of the 1.1 trillion revenue that I had spoken about previously. From an ownership perspective, about a third of these companies that are making over $1 billion are subsidiaries of foreign multinationals. Now, this is disproportionate when you compare us to other regions. In other regions, that number of a third is usually around 10 to 20% are subsidiaries. So, when I have an audience that's international, I tend to say, look, you are a disproportionate share of African business champions, and that it's important to see your role on the continent is not just, an outpost or a subsidiary, but you have an obligation to also contribute to the overall well-being of the place where, revenues are being generated. Finally, we've put together some recommendations, and typically when we put this up, there's typically quite a bit of debate, because there's one big piece here, which is around the operating environment and governance. And, my response there is we all know that to be the case, and we will continue to have those conversations. But we thought about what are sort of very practical Monday morning, I always call this Monday morning recommendations that we can think about to drive. I think the first one is that we need to start to continue to have the conversation not only on growth, but also productivity, especially given all we've seen around overall income, and also on things such as consumption. Productivity is becoming increasingly important. The second piece is around embracing digital and the power that digital has for across the entire economy, not just certain sectors, but across the entire economy, including our government services. The third piece is very critical around developing African talent to serve not just the continent, but also to serve the world. In the context where populations are declining elsewhere, our talents could end up being our biggest export. And on top of that, we already know, and COVID has taught us, by the way, that you don't need to leave the continent in order to work outside of the continent. So how do we make sure that the talent that we have is ready not only for African needs, but for the world's needs? The fourth piece, which I haven't spoken a lot about, is around manufacturing, but not only for domestic consumption, but also export, especially as we become more integrated as a region, but doing it in a competitive way so that, the right things are produced in the right places, increasing our regional connectedness, and then investing to enhance resource productivity and tap into new opportunities. A lot of transition minerals, a lot of metals we have and minerals for transition can be found on the continent. How do we make sure that we don't make the same mistakes of the past, and ensure that we are sort of using these resources for the benefit of the people? Looking at opportunities to benefit from the net zero transition, we have another report where we've identified 8 business opportunities where Africa could really lead the charge from the net zero transition perspective. Even though there's a shift away from agriculture, agriculture still is the largest employer of labor on the continent. And so we need to begin to improve farming productivity to spur the agricultural transition that we need on the continent. Increasing and improving the urban infrastructure in our primary and second cities. And then finally, growing and cultivating more African business champions. So I will stop there and maybe open up for questions if there's any time.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Mayowa Kuyoro, for your insightful keynote presentation, which actually set a clear and thoughtful tone for the evaluation week. And I really like your last slide, because the evaluators in the room and online, I'm sure they can sort of feel in terms of the slide that you're sharing on recommendations. You really captured the structure, the way we'll be disseminating our evaluative knowledge. So you have the context, the lessons, conclusion, and the recommendation. So if I may just come back on the recommendation. So in regard your focus on productivity-driven growth, harnessing African talent, regional connectivity, agricultural productivity, and digital technologies is actually quite timely because it really aligns with the AfDB's new 10-year strategy, 2024 to 2023, which is emphasizing, addressing the Africa's interconnected crises, which require prioritizing sustainable growth, job creation, equity to build long-term solutions. So thank you for that. If I may ask our IT team to show a short video, as our evaluator general pointed out, and VP Marie-Laure also pointed out, this year we are celebrating the African Development Bank's 60th anniversary. This milestone serves as an opportunity to honor our collective achievements and reflect on the transformative progress made in advancing Africa's development. So please enjoy the brief video. It's only for 1 minute that is showcasing these remarkable accomplishments. So IT team, can you please show the video?
Africa! Over the last 60 years, we have financed more than 5,400 projects, built life-changing infrastructure, advanced regional integration, empowered nations, transferred skills, improved access to electricity, to transport, to water and sanitation, and we are investing in Africa's food security. But most importantly, we have transformed millions of lives. From humble beginnings to being recognized as the world's most transparent development institution, the African Development Bank remains the continent's partner of choice for transformational and sustainable development. And this is our legacy: bold innovation, unshakable progress, and unstoppable growth. This is our Diamond Jubilee, and it's time to celebrate. 60 years, one vision, endless possibilities. The African Development Bank, 60 years of making a difference. Africa!
Oh. Indeed, so 60 years of making a difference in the continent. So now we move into our highly anticipated high-level panel discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, I now invite my esteemed colleague, Amon Ziemana, to help us moderate this panel discussion. Amon, I'm sure, is not a stranger to some of you who maybe attended our sustainability event last year. So he's back again to help us moderate this session. Amon Ziemana is the director of the Development Impact and Results Department. Previously, he managed the Delivery Support and Implementation Division, leading reforms like Operations Delivery Dashboard and joint KPIs. He has been instrumental in enhancing accountability for delivery and building high-performance culture within the bank. He also drove initiatives supporting government delivery units and the African Delivery Units Network. Before joining the bank, Amon worked with multilateral institutions in Africa and the Caribbean. He holds an MBA in finance from Western Michigan University and a bachelor's degree in finance and accounting from HEC Montreal. So welcome, Amon, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane, and many thanks to VP Marie-Laure and to Karen for setting the scene so eloquently. And thank you as well to Mayowa for the brilliant analysis that really provides a very powerful context to the discussion that we're about to have. So good afternoon again, esteemed invitees, panelists, and colleagues. I'm very pleased to see that we have almost a full house, and I can see almost 150 colleagues connected online. So thank you all for joining. I think this is really a testament to the importance and the interest that you all have for this topic of the day, which is the role of evaluative knowledge in driving development effectiveness. And I think that the title is actually very telling, in rough seas. So I hope you all brought your life jackets so that we can all overcome the rough seas ahead. I'm delighted to moderate this excellent panel. It's normally composed of very highly knowledgeable officials and experts on this topic, but what I like most about it is that it's very balanced. Not necessarily gender balanced, because in fact it's a bit unbalanced, but it's balanced in the sense that you have both users of evaluative knowledge and producers of evaluative knowledge. And I think this is really brilliant because it really puts the two perspectives face to face. So very well done for IDEV on putting this brilliant panel together. So without further delay, let me try to start presenting. Let me start by presenting the members of the panel. Et permettez-moi de commencer par Monsieur Marcelin Cissé, directeur général du plan au ministère du Plan de l'économie et du développement de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, que nous avons le grand plaisir d'accueillir à cette conversation et à laquelle vous vous joignez en ligne. Monsieur Cissé a plus de 20 ans d'expérience dans la planification stratégique des politiques et programmes de développement, de leur mise en œuvre ainsi que de leur suivi et évaluation, tant au plan national qu'au niveau international. Il a une très riche expérience dans la sous-région en matière de conseil, de collecte d'analyse de données, politique macroéconomique, formulation de politiques et stratégies de développement et de réduction de la pauvreté. Donc, bienvenue, Monsieur Cissé.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le modérateur.
So still on the side of users of evaluative knowledge, we have the great pleasure of welcoming Mrs. Metin Knudsen, Executive Director of the African Development Bank. Mrs. Knudsen represents Denmark, Finland, India, Ireland, Norway, and Sweden at the Board of Directors of the African Development Bank. In her previous roles, she held several senior positions in UN missions and diplomatic missions in various parts of the world, including Afghanistan, Kenya, Somalia, Eritrea. It's a long list. Zambia, Tanzania, and I'm sure I forgot a number of other non-regional countries. She has developed in-depth knowledge of the continent's development context, very passionate about gender equality, as we've seen at the board. She has led the African development at the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So very warm welcome to you, Mette. I'm also pleased to welcome Dr. Anand Morsi, the Deputy Executive Secretary and Chief Economist at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA, also connected online. Dr. Morsi is no stranger to the bank. She was the Director of Macroeconomic Policy and Research at the African Development Bank a few years ago. Her vast experience includes work at EBRD and at the IMF in various capacities. So welcome back, Anand. Welcome home. Last but certainly not least, we are pleased to welcome Mavis Owusu-Gyamfi, President and Chief Executive Officer of the African Center for Economic Transformation, ACET. Mavis' career spans over 25 years in economic and social policy making and development across Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean, working with institutions including the UK Department of International Development, Save the Children, and the Power of Nutrition. Very warm welcome to you, Mavis, as well. Before we get started, let me remind the audience again that, including those connected online, that you'll have an opportunity to ask questions during the Q&A session. So please take good note of your questions, and we'll do our best to address them after the conversation. Pour lancer les débats, je vais peut-être commencer par Monsieur Marcelin Cissé, directeur général du plan, avec une question portant sur l'utilisation des connaissances évaluatives pour guider les décisions stratégiques. Est-ce que vous pouvez partager votre expérience pour dire comment vous utilisez les connaissances évaluatives pour guider les décisions stratégiques et améliorer l'impact des initiatives de développement en Côte d'Ivoire? Merci.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur le modérateur. Je voudrais m'associer au protocole qui a déjà été indiqué dès le début de cette session. Mais avant toute chose, je voudrais prendre la parole au nom de Mme Niale Kaba, ministre de l'économie, du plan et du développement, qui aurait dû animer ce panel, mais qui nous a autorisés à la représenter. Saisir cette occasion pour féliciter la Banque africaine de développement qui fête son 60e anniversaire, mais surtout féliciter également le bureau d'évaluation indépendant de la BAD pour son appui soutenu à l'institutionnalisation de l'évaluation des politiques publiques à l'échelle africaine. Tout à l'heure, je vais revenir. Et le fait d'organiser ces différentes éditions des semaines de l'évaluation contribue à l'échelle africaine à appuyer les efforts d'institutionnalisation de l'évaluation des politiques publiques. Nous avons vu que depuis 2016, chaque année, vous-même, monsieur le modérateur, vous avez indiqué tout à l'heure le nombre de personnes qui sont connectées. Cela dénote de l'importance des personnes qui ont un intérêt pour ce qui concerne l'évaluation des politiques publiques en Afrique. Et donc, cette édition, elle est opportune. Pour répondre de façon spécifique à votre question, comment nous utilisons les connaissances évaluatives? Pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire, il faut indiquer que nous avons bénéficié de l'appui de la Banque africaine de développement à travers un programme que nous avons conçu en liaison avec les équipes. J'ai vu tout à l'heure la vice-présidente Marie-Laure que je voulais féliciter au passage parce que c'est bien à travers l'un des programmes, notamment le PAGEF, qui a été mis en place, que la BAD a appuyé le processus d'institutionnalisation de l'évaluation des politiques publiques en Côte d'Ivoire. Aujourd'hui, la Côte d'Ivoire est l'un des pays à l'échelle africaine qui dispose d'une loi sur l'évaluation des politiques publiques que la Banque africaine de développement a soutenue avec la mise à disposition d'un consultant qui nous a appuyés. Et aujourd'hui, cette loi a été adoptée, promulguée depuis 2022. Et nous sommes dans l'opérationnalisation de cette loi. Ce qu'il faut dire, c'est que pour utiliser les connaissances évaluatives, il faut d'abord les approches institutionnelles et le cadre juridique. Nous avons, pour la Côte d'Ivoire, voulu encadrer l'évaluation des politiques publiques en adoptant une loi. Ça, c'est un point important à indiquer. Et toutes les évaluations que nous sommes en train de mener aujourd'hui, que ce soit les évaluations internes qui concernent l'administration, que ce soit les évaluations externes, les chambres du Parlement, la Cour des comptes et autres, c'est cette loi qui encadre tout ce processus que nous avons mis en place. Et pour pouvoir le faire, nous devons concevoir un répertoire national des politiques publiques. Ça, c'est important. Mais vous convenez avec nous, pour avoir un répertoire des politiques publiques, il faut que cette politique elle-même soit évaluable. Si vous avez un répertoire des politiques publiques qui ne sont pas évaluables, cela n'a aucune valeur. Donc, nous, pour ce qui concerne ce processus d'évaluation, nous avons conduit un ensemble de renforcement des capacités. Nous allons revenir tout à l'heure sur les parties prenantes, mais souligner que ce processus d'évaluation permet de concevoir des politiques qui elles-mêmes sont évaluables, lesquelles politiques nous essayons de concevoir un répertoire des politiques publiques et chaque année, nous consolidons avec l'appui de l'inspection générale d'État, nous consolidons faisons une synthèse des conclusions de ces évaluations qui sont adoptées en Conseil des ministres et ensuite qui sont transmises aux deux chambres du Parlement. Et je suis heureux d'indiquer que dans le cadre de cette institutionnalisation, nous avons aujourd'hui, dans les 2 chambres du Parlement, des commissions en charge de l'évaluation, ce qui est une très bonne chose. Aujourd'hui, toutes les politiques publiques, tous les débats qui ont lieu à l'Assemblée dans les 2 chambres du Parlement sont empreintes, bien entendu, de cette culture évaluative que nous avons contribué à mettre en place à travers cette institutionnalisation. D'ailleurs, j'ai oublié de l'indiquer, notre Constitution de 2016 intégrait déjà de façon pleine la nécessité de la culture de l'évaluation des politiques publiques. Voilà donc comment nous sommes en train d'institutionnaliser un dispositif réglementaire qui encadre l'évaluation des politiques publiques. Nous avons des décrets d'application de cette loi qui sont en cours d'adoption par le gouvernement, avec des fonds qui vont être mis en place. Parce que l'un des défis, justement, c'est comment avoir des ressources financières, parce que les évaluations coûtent cher, sont onéreuses, et il faut des financements pour pouvoir le faire. Cela a été indiqué déjà par certains des précédents intervenants. On sait tous l'importance de l'évaluation. On évalue des politiques pour nous assurer que les objectifs que nous sommes assignés, le bien-être des populations, ces politiques sont mises en œuvre pour impacter positivement les populations ou les cibles pour lesquelles ces politiques ont été conçues. Donc, ça permet de voir un peu quelles sont les insuffisances, quels sont les goulets de tremblement, quels sont les ajustements à faire. Et pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire, nous sommes à la première série de consolidation des conclusions des évaluations et comment les autorités peuvent arbitrer, prendre des décisions sur la base des synthèses qui sont faites pour orienter les décisions. C'est bien entendu à travers les évaluations, les politiques briefs, les recommandations de politique. Je vous ai indiqué tout à l'heure, avec l'appui de l'inspection générale de l'État, nous les faisons adopter en Conseil des ministres avant leur transmission aux chambres du Parlement pour adoption. C'est à travers ce mécanisme que nous pouvons nous assurer que la formulation des politiques publiques, la gestion axée sur le résultat, l'impact sur le bien-être des populations, comment on peut ajuster des politiques publiques, comment on peut structurer quelquefois des projets et programmes de développement pour les rendre avec un impact beaucoup plus important, comment on peut institutionnaliser la culture de l'évaluation, comment on peut mieux allouer les ressources, que ce soit le ciblage spatial et géographique, comment on peut instaurer la culture de la transparence, de la redevabilité et de la bonne gouvernance, parce que justement, l'évaluation sert également à renforcer la culture de la bonne gouvernance. Alors, je dois indiquer que pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire également, nous avons aujourd'hui, au niveau des 2 chambres du Parlement, c'est vrai qu'il y a des commissions qui sont mises en place, mais nous avons des manuels qui sont mis en place. Vous savez que les chambres le Parlement contrôle un peu l'exécutif et pour permettre d'optimiser les résultats de développement. Voilà un peu pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire, quelques éléments que je voudrais indiquer sur l'utilisation des résultats des connaissances pour évaluative pour optimiser les résultats de développement et la transformation structurelle de notre économie. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, M. Cissé, pour ce partage d'expérience extrêmement édifiant sur le parcours du gouvernement de la Côte d'Ivoire sur ce sujet-là et ce renforcement du cadre non seulement juridique, mais également institutionnel pour encadrer justement les évaluations de politique publique, aussi bien internes qu'externes, extrêmement édifiant avec l'appui, merci de le souligner, avec l'appui de la banque à travers ce projet PAGEF. Pourriez-vous peut-être, si vous avez parlé un peu des leçons que vous avez tirées, des forces et des faiblesses que vous tirez de ces différentes évaluations, est-ce qu'il y a des éléments, tendances importantes qui ressortent de ces évaluations, de ces leçons tirées à travers ce cadre institutionnel. Vous avez parlé du rôle central de l'inspection générale de l'État et du travail des commissions dans les deux chambres. Quelles sont les leçons clés qu'ils tirent du travail qu'ils font? Est-ce que vous pouvez partager quelques éléments principaux? Merci bien.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, je vous ai indiqué tantôt que la loi elle-même, elle a été promulguée en 2022. Nous sommes aux premières étapes, bien entendu, de l'opérationnalisation de la loi. Mais quand nous regardons déjà les évaluations qui ont été faites, les premières leçons qu'on peut tirer, c'est les aspects, je l'ai indiqué, il y a des aspects de conception, surtout pour ce qui concerne les projets et programmes de développement. Il faut renforcer, renforcer quelquefois les capacités des acteurs qui pilotent les politiques publiques pour qu'elles soient bien conçues, avec des projets et programmes qui sont bien conçus en amont. Nous avons noté quelquefois, pour ce qui concerne les projets et programmes, des insuffisances pour ce qui concerne les études de faisabilité qui impactent quelquefois l'efficacité de la mise en œuvre, avec des défis liés à ce qu'on peut appeler la gestion du cycle de gestion des projets. Ça, c'est des aspects des leçons que nous tirons. Et des leçons liées quelquefois à la coordination mais intersectorielle de la mise en œuvre des politiques publiques. Voilà, entre autres, quelques éléments, sans trop m'étendre, mais des leçons que nous tirons qui nous permettent, bien entendu, sans perdre de vue quelques aspects opérationnels liés au fonctionnement de l'administration, des défis que nous notons, qui nous permettent de renforcer le processus de planification, d'exécution, de suivi de la mise en œuvre, mais surtout, quelquefois, le processus d'appropriation de ces politiques par les populations, sans perdre de vue les éléments liés au contrôle citoyen de l'action publique. Voilà un peu quelques éléments que je voudrais noter.
Excellent, excellent, monsieur Cissé. Je crois que les éléments que vous venez de citer, je vois autour de la table beaucoup de mes collègues et d'autres partenaires du développement qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui sont très familiers avec les défis que vous venez de parler. Vous avez parlé de défis au niveau de la conception des projets, de la qualité des études de faisabilité, des défis au niveau de la gestion du cycle de vie de projet, des problèmes de coordination sectorielle, et bien entendu le processus d'appropriation par les bénéficiaires. Tout cela, nous sommes malheureusement très familiers. Donc, merci beaucoup pour ce partage de leçons. Nous allons maintenant passer. Let me now turn to another user of evaluative knowledge, Executive Director Knudsen, who's also an avid user of evaluative knowledge. Not only a member of the board, yes, she's not only a member of the board, but she's also the chair of the Committee for Operations Development Effectiveness, CODE. So the CODE committee, for those not familiar with this, it plays a critical central role in fostering a culture of learning, development knowledge, and ensure the application of evaluation knowledge in the design of new policies, strategies, and interventions. So let me perhaps ask the same question. Mete, if you could share your experience on the board and elsewhere on how evaluative knowledge is guiding strategic decision making, as I said, at the board or in your previous experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armand, and thanks, Karen and colleagues, for inviting me to participate in this very interesting discussion. I must admit it's been very inspiring this hour to listen to the interventions so far, both from Karen, from Marie-Laure, but definitely also the presentations by Mrs. Mayova Kuyoro, I think. Yes. I hope you will share your slides and maybe also the report, because I think there was a lot of information there that, if not in, well, some of it was news to me, some maybe not, but it was presented in a way that I think was very, very interesting. So it's not only evaluations that can inspire us, but also this type of really in-depth analysis and comparisons, both within Africa but also with the world. So I think that's the kind of thing we need as well in our work. But also the last speaker, the other panelist, Monsieur Cissé, I found it very inspiring to hear how important the government here finds the need to really assess and evaluate policies and feed the lessons learned into further developments. Because I think one point that, before I mention more about the evaluation as such, but one point that struck me about the presentation by Mrs. Kuyoro was in the end the recommendations, which of course very sound, and I think many of them also, as others were saying, they link up very well with our new 10-year strategy. But I think where we sometimes have a problem is sort of the process of getting to where we implement these recommendations. And I don't know if I'm not so familiar with the technologies of evaluation, but to what extent do you try and assess also when you make recommendations, how do you see us actually getting to a place where those recommendations are being implemented? Because I think we can all agree we need to transform agriculture, for example, but we've said that for like 30, 40 years, and we're still not doing it. And the same with several other of your recommendations. So we need to discuss, and of course a lot of it is about governance, about democracy, and about influence of those who are affected by policies, but it would be interesting with some more work on that. I definitely agree with what has been said about evaluation as being a key source of information also for the committee that I'm now chairing. I actually chaired my first meeting today, so it's a very new hat I'm wearing. But also for the board of the bank as such. I think it's fair to say that we are always waiting with great anticipation when evaluations are on their way, and we chase management for proper responses to those evaluations. And I think often we also ask for them and would actually like to have the results yesterday. And when you know that sometimes it takes several years, then it's yeah, we get sometimes maybe too impatient. But that just shows that in the board there is really a strong respect for the products that come out of our evaluation system here in the bank. And I think I've worked most of my career in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where there has also always been a strong evaluation function relating to our development activities. But I think in terms of the amount of products and the extent to which this bank evaluates its activities, I think is at least I think I have a lot of respect for that, and as far as I can see, it's much more intensive than what I have seen previously in my career. So of course, with all this activity and the quality of the work, the important thing for me is really to make sure that all this knowledge and information is really put to good use. And I think it's not enough to present reports, discuss in the board and so on. Again, we have to also look at the, how do we ensure that it feeds into the way we plan our activities, the way we design them. And to some extent, of course, it's on the management side, on the staff side, to take on board these lessons and recommendations. But I think it's also, I would like to challenge also the evaluation functions and also in our bank, and in being even more focused on how to present your findings and recommendations so that they are easy to use. I mean, they need to be, of course, as been said, they need to be well timed, but they also need to be precise. They need to be action oriented. They need to be prioritized. I mean, sometimes you can get, I don't know, a long list of recommendations, but I think it's very important if these evaluations also lead to a clear prioritization in terms of what is the most important and what can make the most impact in terms of improving what we do. Yeah, I think that should be my comments for now. But again, thanks for allowing me to be part of this discussion.
Thank you very much, Executive Director Cruzet. I think we all recognize and are grateful for your very familiar impatience to see evaluative knowledge to be translated into tangible changes in the way we design policies, strategies, and intervention. So that's extremely welcome. And I think we are very appreciative of that push that you're making every day at the board and elsewhere in our conversations. I think you've put it very well in terms of what we expect from the evaluation function, because not everything is sitting with the practitioners. Also, the evaluation function, I think, is always challenged to present actionable recommendations. And I think you've put it very clearly. The timing is critical, the timeliness of evaluation knowledge, precision and conciseness. And I think we should say that IDEV has made a lot of effort in that sense. I think we all, for those that are working at the bank, when you're about to take the elevator, we can't resist the temptation of grabbing the last issue. It's a 1 page or 2 pages. So now I have a whole pile at my home and my office. But now I'm resisting because no, you have first to read what you have before you take on more. But thank you very much for that. I think that's a good way going in the right direction, action oriented, and yes, of course, prioritize, because the longer the list is, the fewer follow-up will be done. So very, very good point, very strong point. Thank you very much for that. Going back to my notes. So the next question will be addressed to our former colleague, Dr. Anand Morsi. From your rich experience across various institutions, including at the bank, could you share your perspective on how evaluative knowledge can help address issues like economic instability? And I'm sure you'll focus on macroeconomic stability, which is your area of strength, climate change and social inequities in Africa. What challenges do development institutions face in integrating evaluative knowledge into their strategies and operations? Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I think this is a core component, being able to evaluate policies, projects, intervention, is how we learn from what worked, what succeeded, and what didn't, and why. And it really helps to it can help to shape policy formulation, project design, but also it can help in improving the efficiency of using resources. How can we best allocate so that we focus on impact? So it's an incredibly valuable tool for policymakers, for international organizations to really tap into. And it helps having better informed policies, better informed, for example, in the case of the AfDB, better informed decisions by management and executive on what to learn from what happened and how to recalibrate. It also helps in how do you design the strategies going forward and focus more in deepening impact. And particularly on the issues we're talking about for issues of economic instability. This kind of having this evaluative knowledge can help better understand the root causes of what is behind that economic instability. Whether issues like dependence on volatile commodities or issues of weak institutions and underdeveloped markets. That is critical so that we can actually shape our policies, projects, and interventions to tackle these root causes and guide kind of the development efforts toward more resilient and diversified economies. On climate change, similarly, we have the issues of huge needs on climate change and, particularly on adaptation, and yet the financing is scarce. So a key component is how do you use to the best we can existing resources that it can get better impact and scale. So the issue of assessing both the impact and effectiveness of mitigation and adaptation efforts to guide this resource allocation to the most effective solution is key. Another very important element in this is also identifying vulnerable communities and how do we tailor the solutions so that it can actually support these vulnerable communities the most and brutalize actions to protect them. Just as an example, some of the things that we are now realizing, because of the experience that have happened in carbon credit markets in Africa, the experiences have not been very well received by communities. And this has to do, it's not because there's something wrong with the carbon credit markets, but it's because of how the interventions were done and who ended up being the beneficiaries. So really analyzing these issues and getting to the heart of it in how we improve this design going forward, having them own these solutions and the stream of revenues that comes with it, rather than just being appropriated more, say, by the investor side without enough beneficiation at the local community. So this is really the type of things we need to pause and look at how can we improve, because there need to be not only the kind of the bankability of the project or the intervention, there need to be the ownership at all levels, including local communities, of this solution for it to last. Similarly, in issues of social inequalities, this can help us in terms of understanding the impact of certain interventions or projects in terms of disparities, inequalities, not just in terms of services, opportunities, access to resources. And this can make a huge difference in terms of how do we actually go about advocating for more inclusive policies and programs to address the core causes of this poverty and inequality. So that would be very important. Some of the things that it can be dealt with is issues of how to best design social safety nets, how to actually use more progressive taxation to actually address inequalities in some countries. All these things are issues needs evaluation of what has been done before, and if it didn't work, why it didn't work. There may be things also that are optimal solutions, but in realities there are political context and barriers that may make them not a viable solution. So by reflecting on all these issues, we're better able to equip ourselves on the way forward and how to improve. In terms of the challenges, for institutions, I think let me start by something, I dealt myself with when I was at AfDB, because, under my department was ADUA, the additionality and development outcomes of projects. And some of the things that, when you're doing this is basically, you have all the indicators that you need to actually evaluate before and after. So issue of data and availability of data is key. And this is, I think this is like the foundation that would enable us to really better develop this. So if we can work on enhancing this foundation and having more availability of data, more information about baseline, this can make a huge difference, and also the quality of this data. In a way, also it needs to be so that, because we've that, for example, at AfDB, you need to be conscious so that that burden of reporting, you cannot deal with a multinational conglomerate the same as a small, smaller size or medium size enterprise. So you will need to make it so that it's not over cumbersome, but would provide you a good basis to actually do that assessment. So that's, I think, a key component. Another component, of course, is organizational culture on this. There is, more emphasis on, the project design and its implementation and delivery than on the issue of the, learning and reflections and evaluating what has happened and why worked or why didn't work. So this really is key in terms of we need to shift that culture toward more the values and evidence learning to make sure that there is enough focus on this. And of course, usually that's also another issue that is associated to the culture is the availability of resources to actually carry out these evaluations. How are you allocating your resources? How much do you value these evaluations? And then, of course, another very important issue is the time lags. So sometimes there are interventions that you expect that they have a huge impact, but it may not be over 2 years. It may be over a longer time period. So having that realistic expectation on what is expected over what time frame is critical, because in economic development, things sometimes take long time, and sometimes you need also scale in terms of these interventions by themselves, but in terms of like together with a number of others can make a much bigger scale. So these are some of the things that we really need to rethink about them. And to overcome it, we will need to consistently invest in evaluation capacity, and not just, this applies not just for financial institutions or multilateral development banks like AfDB, but it applies also in terms of for governments to look at, have this kind of reflection and ability to evaluate what had worked before, what didn't, and why, and to consistently work on building these data and having them reliable and available, promoting in general a healthy level of transparency and accountability is key. So, you know, one, of course, because this gives you what you've done before, how has it worked or didn't, so it keeps a level of accountability for the results, but it also is a learning process. It's an ongoing learning process that you always recalibrate, you're always trying to improve. So that's kind of, you know, a culture looking. And of course, to strengthen that institutional framework, some of the issues that sometimes creep is this evaluation may not be maybe well integrated in the system, in the ecosystem, to be able to track these intervention policies projects at different levels, you know, of stages of the project or the policy. And that can, if there is kind of this buy-in and you know, integration of it throughout the process, this will make the evaluation a lot more valuable and easier when time comes. And then, of course, the need to foster collaboration, you know, across the, you know, the evaluating units, whether within MDBs, you know, between MDBs and governments, and to engage more with stakeholders. So engage with those that this affects, whether it's, you know, local communities, whether it's, you know, policymakers. That is really important because, you know, then you get the first-hand views that goes beyond what is captured in data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anand, for this very rich contribution. I think you underscored the importance of evaluation knowledge in enhancing the design of interventions and of policies, the effectiveness of our interventions, how it supports decision-making, and more importantly, how it really sharpens our understanding of the root causes of the development issues that we are trying to tackle. And on that front, I think IDEV has done some great work lately in terms of challenging management, in revisiting the theory of change of our intervention, revisiting assumptions that we are making in designing some of these operations. So well done on that. I think very, very helpful. You also underscored the role of evaluation in better tailoring interventions to specific needs of each stakeholder. The role of evaluation knowledge in supporting advocacy activities, a very, very good point. And I think you made some very important points regarding the challenges that institutions face in not only generating, but also harnessing evaluation knowledge, particularly on the quality of the data. This is something that we are all grappling with. You mentioned organizational culture. We'll be able to touch on that in the next question. The resources allocated to evaluation, to the evaluation function, I think I was speaking to Karen just a minute ago. I think she doesn't have any complaint there. I think we're the ones really suffering from limited resources, but I think she's doing very well. Yes, indeed. So thank you very much, Anand, for this very rich contribution and for sharing your experience. So the next question here. Yes, let me now turn to Mavis Owusu-Gamfi to discuss two important issues on this for this discussion. One is really going back to this issue about organizational culture. Would like to have your views on this, and secondly, your perspective on the role of civil society in holding government accountable for development results. So how can governments and development institutions promote a culture of learning and adaptation through evaluation, using evaluation to really promote that culture? And the second part of the question, what role do you see civil society organization could play in using evaluative knowledge to hold government and development institutions to account for development results and to advocate for more inclusive and impactful development. Over to you, Mavis, please.
Amon, thank you very much. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the AfDB for inviting me to join the panel on what is a very important topic. As a head of a policy institute, I cannot overemphasize the importance of data and evaluative knowledge for our governments in Africa and their development partners right now. It is especially critical now that we have limited financial resources, and we are also trying to navigate a myriad of interlinked challenges. If we have robust quality data, if we have evaluative evidence, governments will be able to effectively prioritize, sequence, and interlink their investments and policy choices in the way that can have the fastest and most robust impact on their people. So for us, evaluative knowledge is key to ensuring that our countries are making informed and cost-effective investments right now. There are three ways in which, I believe governments and their partners can promote a culture of learning. The first one is we need leadership buy-in and appropriate resources. Leaders in government must believe in the importance of evaluations and the data that they produce, and they must see the value in combining this knowledge with whatever political expectations they might have in that country when they are making national policy and investment choices. Our governments need to set clear expectations by requiring their departments to have regular performance reviews, making their results publicly available, and establishing review committees to discuss the report and recommend policy or program changes where appropriate. But this needs to be owned by the leadership of the country, because this is the only way you will incentivize ownership at all levels of an executive within a country. And then it's also important that governments invest in evaluations and quality data. Increasing funding locally for evaluative work and reducing reliance on external donors right now is pivotal. Currently, across the continent, we have very few African donors that actually fund their own evaluations. Even when they have evaluation ministries, you will see that up to 60–70% of the money is coming from external partners. As a result, a lot of the evaluations are focused on donor-funded projects or global initiatives and insufficiently on their own internal investments and policy choices. Secondly, as Hanan rightly pointed out, every evaluation process must engage non-government partners and stakeholders. So it means that when you are doing your evaluation, you must engage beneficiaries, you must engage civil society, private sector, thought leaders in your country, academia, think tanks, etc. This is the only way in which you will gain valuable insight. This is the only way in which you will get some of the qualitative knowledge that is critical for making robust decisions. And it also enables you to really hear from your citizens and integrate their voice into the findings of evaluation reports. And we believe that governments can do this by establishing participatory evaluation mechanisms, such as citizen feedback platforms, community-based monitoring systems, to ensure that the voice of the people who are directly affected by these programs and policies are heard in terms of ensuring whether it's having, one, any impact at all, and two, whether it's having the right impact, and thirdly, they are aware of any unintended consequences that have come out of that investment that they've made and can course correct. And thirdly, as Mete rightly said, evaluation results have to be made easily digestible and shared widely. We are always struck by, the kind of war and peace evaluation reports that are shared. you know, if you don't make them simple and digestible, then to be honest, you're not being transparent and honest about your findings, because citizens and key stakeholders need to be able to understand what your evaluation results are saying, to be able to then hold you to account for progress or lack of that countries have made. And this also goes to development institutions. It's really important that development institutions and development partners disseminate their evaluation findings, and not just through conferences and meetings like this, but making sure that it's getting into the public domain, either via media, civil society organizations, creating online repositories of evaluation reports to make it accessible to all key stakeholders. So in terms of the role that we play, if you have civil society organizations getting access to this evaluation, they are able to use it for advocacy and policy influence. They are really able to use it to inform citizens as part of the campaigns that citizens do to hold their governments to account. It is really important to ensure that the public is aware of what the government said they were going to do, what the government says they have achieved, and to be able to put pressure on governments where they are failing to honor that commitment. And this we've seen in countries where we've seen this done really effectively. It's been done through the creation of partnership and CSO networks with government and their development partner institutions. It also ensures inclusivity and equity within the process. Very often you hear civil society accusing MDBs and a range of stakeholders of not being transparent. It's just because they don't have easy access to the data. They don't have easy access to the information that is being produced. And as a result, they are also not involved actively in the development and analysis of that data to be able to ensure that what is being committed in the name of citizens are being effectively implemented. I'll stop there.
Wow, thank you very much, Mavis. This is a very, very powerful plea for paying more attention to reminding ourselves what the evaluation process is about, and who are the most concerned by the evaluation knowledge. And I think you've made a very, very strong point that we tend to speak among ourselves, but tend to at the same time exclude those that are directly impacted by development policies, strategies, and interventions. So extremely great point. I think there's many things to digest, both from I think the government side, and I think Mr. Sisi, I think, has taken very, very good note of the excellent recommendations that you're making, particularly regarding the need for engaging with citizens' platform, engaging with them, allocating adequate resources to the evaluation function, not only to interventions, policies, and strategies supported by donors and development partners, but those that are initiated by the government, making sure that there is a process and adequate resources to be able to evaluate these programs, and making sure that they do reach the intended objectives and constituencies. And as well, I think the lessons that you are also drawing is also of great importance to us development partners, because you are also you also mentioned how we are packaging these evaluation knowledge. Is it sufficiently simple, digestible? Is it do we disseminate in such a way that it's accessible and provided to providing the public domain in a form that is accessible to all? And how do we make sure that this is useful for the purpose of advocacy, engagement between citizens and government on development programs. So extremely important points that you've made, Mavis. Thank you very much for that perspective. I'm sure, I'm looking at the time and I can see it's getting a bit tight. So I think I would like to perhaps very quickly, so that you all the panelists have an opportunity to share some lasting thoughts before we move on to the Q&A. Yes, so I'd like to hear from all of you on your final thoughts on how you foresee the role of evaluation evolving in Africa's development agenda, particularly in achieving the development goals set for the bank's 10-year strategy, Agenda 2063, and the SDGs. And just to keep in mind that Africa is not on track on the SDGs. We need to leverage, harness evaluative knowledge to really think of how we can scale up and accelerate development, progress, and transformation on the continent. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on how we go about doing this, and perhaps as well, if you in your final thoughts, if you can also touch on the excellent points I think made by Mavis, I think, which are worth reflecting on. So I'll start, I think, perhaps with, I can see you're about to leave the room. Yes. Yes, extremely brief. Just so in 1 minute, your thoughts on this point would be extremely helpful. So perhaps let me perhaps start with at the beginning with Mr. Cissé. Just 1 minute of your thoughts on this point. And let me know if I should repeat the question in French. Thank you. Monsieur Cissé? Est-ce que vous souhaitez que je répète la question en français?
Non, je pense que j'ai très bien compris la question. C'est vrai que vous avez dit au départ que, et peut-être il y a des questions de gens, peut-être que c'est ce qui fait que l'interprète a dit Madame Cissé au lieu de Monsieur Cissé. Mais en tout état de cause, je voudrais saluer et remercier les panélistes parce qu'on a noté que les débats sont très enrichissants. Nous-mêmes, dans le cadre de ce panel, on avait préparé des éléments sur les autres questions, mais je vois que les questions étaient largement couvertes. Moi, je pense que l'avenir de l'évaluation, j'ai envie de dire, c'est un avenir plus ou moins radieux. Vous avez aujourd'hui les populations dans l'ensemble qui sont conscientes aujourd'hui de la nécessité de la redevabilité, les gouvernements qui sont également conscients de la nécessité de rendre compte de son action, les gouvernants qui sont conscients de voir l'impact des politiques qui sont conduites, leur impact sur l'amélioration du bien-être des populations. Et dans le cadre de l'agenda 2063 et des ODD, je pense que l'évaluation va continuer à jouer un rôle de premier plan sur la base de ce que je viens de dire, et particulièrement comment cela peut se faire de façon pratique. Quand vous prenez par exemple les ODD, je vais vous prendre un seul cas pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire. Vous regardez, nous avons les indicateurs sur, je vais vous prendre 2 cas s'il vous plaît, sur la mortalité maternelle. Nous avons noté pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire par exemple, que la mortalité maternelle elle est encore élevée, même si elle a diminué de moitié de 2012 à aujourd'hui. Alors, nous, pour le prochain PND, nous sommes en train de conduire une évaluation pour connaître les causes structurelles de la mortalité maternelle. C'est l'exemple que je prends. Nous avons noté également pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire au cours des dernières années, sur les dernières années, la dernière décennie, nous avons enregistré un taux de croissance important avec une réduction de la pauvreté, mais nous voulons amplifier l'impact des mesures de croissance sur les populations. Donc, nous sommes en train de creuser pour voir un peu quelles sont les causes profondes, structurelles de la pauvreté pour bien cibler les politiques avec la conduite de cas de pauvreté. Je pense que pour ce qui concerne l'ensemble des ODD, l'ensemble des indicateurs de l'agenda 2063, il faut regarder au cas par cas dans les différents pays, voir où les performances sont faibles et conduire des études, quelquefois des évaluations, quelquefois randomisées, pour qu'on puisse bien concevoir des politiques. J'ai suivi tout à l'heure, cela a été dit. Nous sommes dans la recherche-action et que les recommandations de ces politiques soient assorties de policy briefs avec des recommandations précises, concises, qui permettent d'impulser une dynamique de transformation des politiques publiques. Oui, pour les prochaines années, l'évaluation va continuer à jouer un rôle important, mais on n'a pas beaucoup insisté sur l'importance des données statistiques. Quand vous parlez de l'agenda 2063, vous parlez des ODD, on évalue, on mesure les ODD comment? Il faut des données statistiques fiables, désagrégées, y compris par sexe. Mais quelquefois, quand vous regardez nos appareils statistiques au niveau des différents pays, c'est vrai qu'il y a des améliorations, il y a un renforcement continu, mais quelquefois, il faut des ressources pour conduire des enquêtes, des études régulières, fiables, désagrégées sur l'ensemble du territoire qui permet de concevoir ces politiques. C'est un aspect sur lequel on n'a pas beaucoup insisté. Comment produire des données probantes, évidentes, qui permettent de conduire ces évaluations. Voilà un peu un aspect sur lequel je voulais indiquer et je vous remercie.
Merci, merci beaucoup, M. Cissé. Edith Knusset.
Sorry, I think the French translation is a little bit after, so I didn't hear that you were talking to me. Yeah, thank you very much for giving me the floor again, and just very briefly, as I think a lot has been said, actually also touching upon this issue of how to achieve these development goals. And I think the thing is, of course, that as the slides from Mrs. Kuyoro demonstrated, I mean, there's no way we will achieve our goals if we don't start doing things differently. And we cannot continue down the roads that we've been following for the last decades, because then we will never achieve those objectives. So I think it's very clear that both our institution, other MDBs, bilateral donors, but definitely also the governments here in Africa. We have to together take some more bold initiatives and trying to follow some new paths. There, I think it's really important that we are followed all the way by evaluations, by analysis, by ongoing assessments that will allow us to course correct if those new initiatives do not seem to either take us in the right direction. But we can't waste more decades. So we have to act boldly, to think in a new way, but at the same time also all the time be accompanied by data, by assessments of results that demonstrates whether we are on the right track or not. So I think that would be my comment.
Thank you very much. Very wise. Dr. Morsi.
Thank you. I think we know already that there has been a lag in terms of achievement of SDGs. So if we are thinking about how do we go forward rescuing the SDGs, we need to really have a reflective analysis of what is it, why it hasn't worked so far. Okay. First of all, where did it work and why? Okay, because you have different experiences across different countries. So where it actually worked, what made it work, what were the key success components, whether in the design, the implementation, the accountability, understanding this. what are the lessons learned that can actually be kind of taken beyond that country and applied across. Understanding what are the key obstacles. And for example, a major one for Africa has been the lack of affordable finance at scale to actually finance this, the SDGs investments that are required. So understanding and diagnosis of the key impediments, the success stories, and then also the type of behavioral changes and mindset changes that can actually lead to a different outcome will be key. And the role of the evaluative knowledge in this would be one, of course, is the accountability of what has been done and what has happened, but also to better inform going forward, and to echo also what colleagues have said, the need to have an adaptive way of dealing with this. It's a learning process. So, adjusting the strategies or the policy formulation or the intervention to improve its impact will need to be an ongoing process rather than just, I don't know, after 5 or 10 years, we go and we look at this. Meanwhile, we have lost this very valuable, way of actually in a timely manner and adjusting and correcting. So that is important. Another very important issue is going beyond, and in many of the strategies, this still is an issue, going beyond the outputs, like the number of schools built, to more outcomes in terms of literacy rates and things that can really measure the impact and long-term impact as well. Like, for example, the increased economic activity or average income levels due to higher education. All these things will really improve our ability to do better going forward in terms of SDGs, whether it's the 10-year implementation plan, and having in the system, incorporating in the system a way to have this real-time feedback to adapt and correct strategies will be core as we move forward on this issue. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Anand. And over to you, Mavis.
Thank you very much, Amon. So let me start. Look, our public investment effectiveness on average is medium to low, okay? We have limited resources as a continent to achieve the complex challenges that we have to navigate. Our people are getting frustrated and fed up, and our young people are out there demonstrating in some countries. Evidence-based policy is the only option available to us right now. Countries that do not start looking at evidence-based policy to make robust, informed choices are taking a risk. And they're taking a big risk, not just on the eventual negative outcomes, but they're also taking a big risk with their citizens. They need to make sure that these evaluations are also context-specific, localized, and it's building on local capacity, and ensuring, most importantly, that these evaluations are inclusive, they are gender sensitive, and they involve a broad range of stakeholders, especially our most marginalized groups in our society. And as I said earlier, make the information available to enhance accountability and transparency. And it would be remiss of me if I don't make one last pitch. I think it's really important that governments and their partners really work with local institutions when they are thinking about doing these evaluations. African research institutions, African think tanks, etc. I know that it's great to have the stamp of McKinsey or KPMG, But if we are going to embed this as a core part of how we do business on this continent, then it's really important that it becomes African institutions and the research on the continent becomes an integral part of this evaluation process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, esteemed panelists, for this extremely insightful and wise words to conclude our discussion before we move to Q&A. I get a sense of optimism about the consciousness of awareness of governments to really take on the evaluation agenda. And at the same time, there's realism on the challenges ahead. You've mentioned the quality of the data, which remains a challenge, statistical data. I think this is something we hear as well when we discuss the SDGs. The quality of the data is not there. There is, of course, the importance of taking bold measures, realizing that the current trajectory is not on track and we need to course correct. The need to have a very adaptive approach to development interventions, and there's important concept and issues that are raised about accountability, culture of accountability, transparency, the importance of strengthening African institutions, the importance of placing evaluation at the center of development, the development process, understanding the development process and applying the knowledge to continuously enhance policy strategies and interventions. So extremely important recommendations going forward. Thank you very much for that. Now, let me perhaps turn to Hadi for the Q&A session. So we have an opportunity for the audience to ask a few questions, but perhaps I'll ask if we, as a priority, I like to always give priority to those that are here physically, that taken honor us with their presence. So if there's any question in the room, I think we should start with you, and then we'll move on to the chat box. And perhaps Hadi has selected a few questions. I realize we're a bit tight on time, but I'm sure we can have at least, how many questions do you think we can entertain? We can, okay. Okay. That's already very generous. Thank you. So I think the panelists will indulge us. So yes, there's a question. If you can please indicate your name, institution as well, and function. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you hear me. I'm Debazu Yantu. I'm a principal evaluation officer at IDEV, African Development Bank. I have a question to Ms. Mayowa. I hope I pronounce her name quite well. One aspect of her presentation struck me. She said that there is a structural shift in the African economy away from agriculture and extraction into services. Generally, this is the trend that is expected, that we shift from those sectors to services. But yet, we all know that across countries in Africa, we have the same situation where there is a lot of unemployment. So I want to understand if she has an explanation. Why is it that despite this virtue, this well-acclaimed change, we still have large unemployment? So thank you very much.
Thank you. If we don't have any more questions in the, oh yes, please.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Amani Damit, je suis le responsable de l'unité de suivi et évaluation des impacts, la BOAD. J'ai une question concernant la Côte d'Ivoire qui a présenté une architecture assez avancée en matière d'évaluation. Je voudrais savoir quel est le rôle exact de la Cour des comptes, parce que l'exécutif a été mentionné, le législatif, mais je n'ai pas vu une attention spécifique à la Cour des comptes. Merci.
Ok, bonsoir, moi c'est Clément Bancé, je suis chargé d'évaluation chef au niveau du département de l'évaluation de la banque, IDEV. Et ma question également est en lien avec la présentation de la Côte d'Ivoire. J'avoue, j'ai eu l'opportunité de conduire l'évaluation pays de la banque, l'intervention de la banque en Côte d'Ivoire. Et nous avons justement été confrontés à cette question de qualité des données qui a été maintes fois ressortie ici. Alors, je voudrais savoir concrètement au niveau de la Côte d'Ivoire, qu'est-ce qui est fait pour améliorer un peu cette situation. Merci.
Okay, so let's start with this first set of questions of people in the room, and then we'll move on to the chat box. So one question to Mayowa regarding the structural shift of the economy to the service sector, and how this has impacted the unemployment numbers on the continent. And there are two questions related to the institutional setup in Côte d'Ivoire. Donc, il y a beaucoup d'intérêt à la présentation de la Côte d'Ivoire, la structure institutionnelle, le rôle de la Cour des comptes. Donc, Monsieur Cissé, si vous pouvez bien prendre les deux questions qui vont suivre. So let's start with Mayowa, please. Just very briefly.
I think she's not online so far.
She
Maybe you
hasn't.
can start with another one.
OK, sounds good. Monsieur Cissé, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, je peux, monsieur le modérateur, je peux répondre aux deux questions de la Côte d'Ivoire. Je voudrais remercier les participants. C'est deux questions pertinentes. Alors, la question relative à le rôle de la Cour des comptes. Alors, je voudrais vous préciser que dans le cadre de l'élaboration de la loi sur l'évaluation des politiques publiques en Côte d'Ivoire, nous avons mis en place un comité national multi-acteurs, et c'est l'un des présidents de la Chambre de la Cour des comptes qui a présidé l'ensemble des travaux. La Cour des comptes intervient dans le cadre de l'évaluation externe, principalement en appui aux chambres du Parlement. Bien entendu, vous convenez que la Cour des comptes, de par ses missions, peut s'auto-saisir sur des dossiers d'évaluation pour pouvoir les conduire. C'est principalement l'évaluation externe, et le rôle de la Cour des comptes est bien reflété dans le dispositif institutionnel de l'évaluation des politiques publiques. Pour ce qui concerne la collecte de données, vous avez tout à fait raison. Et pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire, le diagnostic a été fait. Et vous avez dû, si vous suivez bien la Côte d'Ivoire, vous avez compris qu'il y a eu très, très récemment la réforme des statistiques qui a été adoptée en Conseil des ministres avec l'Institut national de la statistique qui est devenu Agence nationale de la statistique. Tout ça dans le cadre du renforcement de l'appareil statistique national qui va avoir certainement beaucoup plus de moyens, avec un fonds pour les statistiques qui va être mis en place pour la collecte des données régulières, avec des capacités renforcées en termes de ressources humaines, financières et matérielles, la conduite des opérations d'enquête, des données d'enquête de grande envergure, pour qu'on puisse avoir des données fiables, désagrégées, qui nous permettent de mieux mesurer l'impact des politiques publiques sur les populations. Oui, la dynamique est en cours. C'est la réforme de l'appareil statistique national dont l'opérationnalisation est en cours. Voilà un peu la réponse que je voulais apporter. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Cissé, pour ces précisions. Hadi, should we take on a few questions from the chat box?
Yes, we have some few questions from the chat box. We will take some of them. There is a question for Dr. Anand Morsi. What is your experience of private sector use of evaluative knowledge? Should I give several? Or okay. There is another one for Mavis, Mrs. Mavis Owusu Gyamfi. What is the contribution of civil society to the institutionalization of evaluation, in particular the role of National Evaluation Association? And do you have best practices of government that is taking effort to evaluate their policies? I'm not sure if I okay. Thank you. A third one, so this one will go to Monsieur Marcel Cissé. Qu'est-ce qui est fait au niveau de l'État dans son processus également de l'institutionnalisation de la culture de l'évaluation? Je m'arrêterai à là parce que la question n'est pas très claire et je pense que ce que je viens de dire est suffisant. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Hadi. So, first question for Anand, second question for Mavis, and third question for Mr. Cissé, s'il vous plaît.
Okay, so in terms of the private sector experience, the example that comes to my mind is one of engagement with the private sector. So, you know, there are countries in the continent that have introduced investor councils, where basically it's a council that includes, you know, government, different ministries, private sector, domestic and foreign, and then they look at, you know, feedback on new rules and regulations and get the feedback from the private sector to assess what need to be recalibrated, what need to be adjusted. And this has been, you know, when in countries where this has been instituted, have been a really valuable tool to improve the business environment, but also to engage in a credible and reliable way with, you know, the private sector and the business community, because it strengthened their buy-in. They feel heard, they listen to what, you know, this policy, what is not working well, how it should be adjusted, you know, wrinkles to be ironed. So that's really the type of thing that we need to encourage more of, involvement of multi-stakeholders to listen to and adjust policies and interventions accordingly. Back to you.
Yes, Mavis, would you like to take on the second question, please?
Yeah, of course. So let me start with the question around the role of national evaluation associations. Of course, they have a role in the evaluation process. One of the biggest challenges that we see is that across government, you always have pockets of excellence, okay? So you will go into certain line ministries and you will see pockets of excellence. What we are struggling to see is effective aggregation to make informed choices overall. So what the idea about these associations that they're supposed to play a robust role, but if they are not effectively funded, it's a bit of a stop-start process. The other challenge we also have is that, like most areas of research, we don't always agree on outcomes of evaluation reports. So we've got to find a way of setting some minimum agreed standards that we can all work and align behind. So that's the first thing. In terms of places of excellence, as I said earlier, across the continent, in almost every country that we've been involved in, you will see a number of line ministries where you have really good evaluation hubs within line ministries. Where we have struggled to see good aggregate results has been overall. Where there are pockets of excellence, it always upsets us a little bit to see that the bulk of the funding comes from donors. And as soon as the donor funding ends, you tend to reset it again. So there's got to be a way of keeping that excellence beyond donor funding. If there are two countries where I have seen what I would call good examples of aggregate evaluation informing policy, on the economic side, not the social side, the two countries that have seen some positive aggregate evaluations have been Tunisia and South Africa, on a consistent basis rather than for a couple of years and then stop. I'll stop there.
Interesting point. Next question pour Monsieur Cissé, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Alors, sur le processus d'institutionnalisation, vous savez, j'ai indiqué tantôt que on avait préparé des éléments pour l'ensemble des questions. Alors, j'ai indiqué que la loi même a été promulguée en 2022. Le processus d'institutionnalisation est en cours. Tout comme cela a été dit tout à l'heure par les partenaires, nous avons prévu dans notre dispositif institutionnel une plateforme de la société civile. Et pour ce qui concerne tous nos exercices de revue, que ce soit des ODD, que ce soit de l'agenda vers 63, que ce soit la mise en œuvre des politiques, nous associons la société civile à cet exercice pour avoir le ressenti de la société civile. Pour ce qui concerne l'institutionnalisation de la loi, nous avons noté qu'il y a quelques défis. J'ai parlé des défis liés à l'appropriation. J'ai parlé des défis liés aux capacités. Et nous avons noué des partenariats stratégiques avec un ensemble de partenaires. Nous avons JIPAL, avec lequel nous sommes en train en liaison avec notre École nationale des statistiques. Parce que quand vous regardez un peu, c'est vrai qu'il faut renforcer la culture de l'évaluation, mais vous la renforcez en ayant une masse critique d'experts qui ont les capacités pour pouvoir conduire des évaluations. Nous avons noté que dans l'administration, il y avait des gaps de capacités et il fallait commencer par renforcer les capacités. Donc, nous avons conçu un programme en liaison avec DIPAL et avec notre École nationale de statistiques et d'économie appliquée. Nous avons un master qui est en cours avec un partenariat avec AVAD pour permettre à d'avoir des capacités en matière d'évaluation. Et nous avons déjà la deuxième cohorte qui est en train d'être formée. Et l'idée sous-jacente, c'est d'avoir une masse critique de ressources humaines dans l'administration qui dispose de capacités évaluatives. Et nous allons plus loin. Nous avons noté également, pour ce qui concerne les centres de recherche, il y a nécessité de renforcer également les capacités des centres de recherche. Et nous les avons embarqués avec les recherches que font DIPAL et autres. Nous organisons différents séminaires thématiques et le prochain séminaire thématique va avoir lieu au mois d'octobre et ce sera sur les questions de santé et de protection sociale. L'idée pour nous, c'est de permettre à ces experts qui sont rompus en matière d'évaluation de pouvoir partager, transférer les capacités avec les centres de recherche et les universitaires ivoiriens. Voilà un peu ce processus que nous conduisons qui doit permettre de renforcer non seulement l'appropriation, mais renforcer les capacités pour que nous ayons des experts étant rompus aux pratiques évaluatives. Voilà un peu quelques éléments liés à l'institutionnalisation de notre projet de loi, la loi sur l'évaluation des politiques publiques en Côte d'Ivoire. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Cissé. Nous allons prendre une dernière série de questions avant de clôturer, comme le temps commence à nous faire défaut. Donc, je me tourne vers Adi, si tu vois 2 ou 3 questions intéressantes.
Fine. I don't think I will ask all the questions, but there is one that I can ask and everybody can say 1 or 2 words. It's regarding how do we encourage Africa's leaders to promote evaluation. Voilà. And to use it.
Excellent question. So African leaders, perhaps let me start. I can see Mehdi is a bit busy with the on the phone, so perhaps. Okay, so let me start perhaps with Mavis, and I'm sure she's going to have very strong views on that. So go ahead and knock yourself out.
Okay, that is a very tough question. And if I had the answer, I would be a multimillionaire. I think what we have found where it works is where African leaders can see the value. So they can see the value between the data, the results, and their political commitments. I think very often when we do evaluations, we tend to, we are very technocratic in how we present it. And we tend to forget the importance of the political side of the world African leaders have to navigate. So I think the best way we can do it is when we do the evaluations and we do present the results, we also demonstrate how it benefits them politically. That is how we're going to get them to take it seriously.
That's real politics. Thank you for that. Yes. Anand, your views on this? Are you sitting in UNECA? So I think you're very close to the power and to the leadership of the continent, sitting in Addis.
So just can you repeat the question again? Sorry, because I had difficulty hearing the question itself.
Oh, yes, of course. How do you, I mean, all the partners and all the stakeholders are encouraging Africans leaders to promote evaluation in Africa to use. That's not the question initially.
Yeah, I think here it's even broader than just evaluative. I think it's the idea of encouraging more evidence-based policy making. A component of that, of course, is the evaluative knowledge. But the core issue is that designing, allocating resources need to be based on evidence and better analysis, informed, and a bit more also inclusive in terms of getting interactions with various stakeholders across the board. So this is definitely some of the elements that the work at ECA this is has been the core of the interactions with our ministers of finance and African policymakers across the board. I think the issue of the uptake, I think there is a number of elements here. One of it is our own responsibilities as institutions and African international organizations of putting forward very timely, clear and compelling cases and evidence to guide the shaping of policymakers. So there is the responsibility at our hand of doing that so that it gets better informed and entice them to perhaps go in a deeper dive in other issues. And then also encouraging this as a way of also informing the debate and the accountability and governance within countries. So how can we have, in discussions, whether it's within parliament or the various accountability institutions within countries, to engage with them to build their capacity, but also to encourage more work to have this kind of evidence-based assessment of, just as one. And I think one that we've been in discussion over so many different forums, uses of debt. Okay, when governments accrue debt, how well utilized has it been? Efficiency of that spending, outcomes, return, are the type of discussions that we need to really deeply engage in, both at national level and regional level to foster more accountability and better policy making going forward. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anand. Do you want to draw on your rich experience in engaging with political leadership in your previous, perhaps in previous roles in diplomatic missions in UN?
Well, I think that some of the key points was really said here, that it's all about accountability. I mean, yes, it's very, very important to have data, facts, knowledge, analysis as the basis of policy making. But you will only get the right policies if those who are to make them and implement them are accountable to those that will be affected by those policies. So I think that what Anand just mentioned also about the role of parliaments, I think is very important. There's been talk about civil society. I think a free press is key here, and I think that's actually maybe an ally in terms of getting some of this knowledge out there. Back again a little bit to what I said earlier on, that I hope that evaluations can be phrased in ways that are understandable for the broader public and also for journalists, for example. And I think one point there is also that when we have these independent evaluation functions, they should also be courageous and use that independence to speak truth to power and to be very direct in their findings. It doesn't help if it's sort of convoluted what the results they get. So I think aligning, finding these allies in parliament, civil society, the press, all of these mechanisms to make sure that the policymakers and implementers will have to stand up for what the choices they make and be held accountable. And I think that's just very important.
Merci beaucoup, Mété. Et nous allons essayer de clôturer avec Monsieur Cissé, qui est bien placé, je crois, pour nous aider à résoudre, à répondre à cette question. À vous, Monsieur Cissé, s'il vous plaît. Vous avez le dernier mot.
Bon, merci, monsieur le modérateur. J'espère que j'ai bien suivi la question. Il s'agit de comment les dirigeants peuvent avoir l'importance un peu de l'évaluation. C'est bien ça. Je crois que je vous ai indiqué tout à l'heure dans le développement que je faisais, je vous ai indiqué qu'aujourd'hui, quand vous prenez les populations à travers le continent, il y a beaucoup plus d'attention des populations sur la redevabilité. Et donc, les gouvernants sont de plus en plus soucieuses de l'impact des politiques publiques sur le bien-être des populations. Je pense que ça, c'est connu. En tout cas, quand vous regardez pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire, cette conscience, elle existe très bien. Et d'ailleurs, c'est ce qui a facilité l'adoption de la loi sur l'évaluation des politiques publiques. Il faut continuer le renforcement, la sensibilisation et l'appropriation de cette loi pour que, à tous les niveaux, chacun prenne conscience de l'importance de l'évaluation qui permet non seulement d'optimiser les résultats de développement, de rationaliser les dépenses, de renforcer l'efficacité allocative des ressources et de renforcer l'efficacité de la mise en œuvre des projets et programmes de développement, de faire les ajustements nécessaires pour concevoir de bonnes politiques qui permettent d'optimiser les résultats de développement. Je pense que ça, c'est un fait, en tout cas pour ce qui concerne la Côte d'Ivoire. On sent qu'il y a ce souci de redevabilité, ce souci de gouvernance qui est de mise et il faut continuer ce processus de sensibilisation, d'appropriation à tous les échelons. On a parlé tout à l'heure dans le développement de l'importance d'associer les bénéficiaires. Les bénéficiaires ici des politiques publiques, c'est l'ensemble des populations. Si chacun joue très bien son rôle, il est clair que ce soit les bénéficiaires, les populations, que ce soit l'administration, l'exécutif, j'ai envie de dire, que ce soit les chambres du Parlement, que chacun joue normalement son rôle, que ce soit les instituts de formation, les centres, les universités, les centres de recherche de formation, que ce soit même les partenaires au développement. Vous voyez aujourd'hui, avec, par exemple, la Banque africaine de développement et plus globalement l'ensemble des portefeuilles, nous faisons des revues régulières des portefeuilles, des projets, programmes. Nous faisons des évaluations même du programme de coopération avec la Banque africaine de développement. C'est par des exercices de ce genre qu'on va continuer à renforcer la culture de l'évaluation. Voilà un peu ce que je peux indiquer comme réponse. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Cissé. Alors, nous allons clôturer cette très riche discussion. Et je voudrais remercier, justement, profiter pour remercier non seulement le panel brillant que nous avons eu, mais également les mots d'introduction que nous avions de la vice-présidente Marie-Laure, de Karen, la brillante présentation de McKinsey, qui a soulevé beaucoup de questions qui nous interpellent. Et j'espère que vous allez pouvoir partager la présentation sans nous la facturer. Mais merci beaucoup, ça a été extrêmement riche. So I would like to thank our panelists for an excellent conversation on the central role of evaluation knowledge in shaping and enhancing the development process. The discussion benefited from various perspectives, government, development partners, policy experts, and the civil society. I very much appreciate the convergence of points made by all panelists on the critical ingredients for positioning evaluation knowledge at the center of the development process. I'll start and I'll mention some of them. Ownership, I think, was mentioned several times, the importance of ownership by all stakeholders, and that is directly related to resources, adequate resources to the evaluation process. And including, I think the case for Côte d'Ivoire was quite interesting, the policy and institutional framework that is required in countries to really push the evaluation agenda. A culture of accountability and transparency, I think, was emphasized, underscored by all panelists. And when we say accountability and transparency, that's towards all stakeholders, starting with citizens. And we've heard a very, very strong plea to really make citizens really at the center of the engagement on the evaluation process. Strengthen capacity of local institutions, the evaluation approaches. The quality of data, I think everybody mentioned this point. And of course, what is very, very important is that relentless commitment to evaluation and the application of evaluation knowledge to the design and the enhancement of policies, strategies, and development interventions. So I'd like to thank you very warmly, particularly the panel members, the panelists, but also more importantly, IDEV, for bringing us together for this great conversation. We look forward to, I understand there's going to be other 2 more days. Two more days of that. So we'll try to carve out some time. It's not very easy in September, but we'll do our best to take part in this conversation. So thank you all very much, and thank you very much for the participant. I can see that we're still very close to 100 people connected online, and those who stayed on this afternoon in the room. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to another set. Oh, and back to you, Jane. You're the The MC, the one organizing us. Thank you very much, Jane.
Okay, thank you so much, Amond. You actually make my work easier. And increasingly, you're becoming my partner in crime in organizing this. For my next event, guess who I'm inviting? Okay, so yes. So thank you so much, Amon Ziemana, all the panelists, Edie Mete Kunitson, Mr. Marceline Sise, Dr. Hanan Mosi, Mrs. Mavis Owusu Janfi. This was a very rich and insightful discussion. So thank you so much. So I'm not going to wrap up or make a summary of a summary because Amon did an excellent job in moderating this particular session. So this brings to the conclusion of today's program. Tomorrow we resume at 9 a.m. GMT with 2 thought-provoking sessions. The morning session will focus on economic diversification, followed by an afternoon session on environmental and climate challenges. So for our online participants, before signing off, please take a short survey on your way out because these surveys actually help us improve our future events. So thank you once again to everyone for participating in today's session. And I hope to see most of you, if not all of you, tomorrow morning. Thank you so much.
L'application des...